The mop bucket wheels squeaked against the polished marble floor. It was past 8 in the evening, and Daniel was making his usual rounds through the grand hallways of Riverside Performing Arts Academy. The sound of a violin drifted from one of the practice rooms, mixing with the distant notes of a cello from somewhere upstairs. Daniel had been working as a janitor here for 3 years now. Every evening, after the students went home and the teachers locked their offices, he would emerge from the maintenance closet with his cleaning cart. The academy was different at night, quieter, more peaceful. Just him, his thoughts, and the occasional music student practicing late. He pushed his cart past the trophy cases that lined the main corridor. Dozens of golden statues and plaques sparkled under the dim lights. Regional championships, state competitions, national awards. The students here were talented, no doubt about it. Most of them came from wealthy families who could afford the steep tuition fees and private lessons that cost more than Daniel made in a month. But Daniel didn't mind. He liked his job. It paid the bills for his small apartment across town, and there was something calming about cleaning these beautiful spaces. Plus, there was another reason he loved working here. A secret reason that nobody knew about. As he mopped near Studio C, he slowed down. The door was slightly open, and through the gap he could see the grand piano sitting in the center of the room. Its black surface gleamed under the overhead lights. Daniel had always been drawn to that piano. Something about it called to him. 3 years ago, when he first started this job, he didn't know anything about music. His family couldn't afford instruments or lessons when he was growing up. But working here changed something inside him. Night after night, he would hear the students practice. He would pause outside doors listening to scales and sonatas, concertos and etudes. At first, it was just background noise. But slowly, he started to really listen. He began to recognize patterns. He could tell when someone hit a wrong note. He started humming the melodies while he cleaned. Then, about 2 years ago, something shifted. He was cleaning Studio C late one night when he saw a book left open on the piano. It was a beginner's guide to reading music. Daniel looked around. Nobody was there. He walked over and stared at the pages. The little dots and lines looked like a foreign language. That night, he took a photo of the page with his phone. At home, he searched online for free videos about reading music. He spent hours watching tutorials, pausing and rewinding, taking notes on scratch paper. The next week, he found another book left behind. Then another. He started photographing pages, studying them during his lunch breaks. He watched countless videos of pianists on his phone. His fingers would move in the air, mimicking their hand positions while he rode the bus to work. 6 months later, he did something bold. It was almost midnight, and he had checked every corner of the building. Everyone was gone. His heart pounding, Daniel sat down at the piano in Studio C. His hands shook as he placed them on the keys. That first note he played was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. It was just one note, but it was real. He had created it himself. From that night on, Daniel's routine changed. After finishing his cleaning duties, after making sure every door was locked and every light was off, he would slip into Studio C. For 30 minutes, sometimes an hour, he would practice. His rough, work-worn hands would dance across the keys, making mistakes, learning, improving. He knew he could get fired if anyone caught him. The pianos were expensive, meant only for enrolled students and faculty. But he couldn't stop. Music had awakened something in him that he didn't know existed. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was good at something, like he had found his purpose. Now, 15 months after that first note, Daniel could play actual pieces. Nothing too fancy, but real music. He had taught himself scales, chords, basic classical pieces. Every night he got a little better. Tonight was different, though. As Daniel finished mopping the main hall, he noticed a bright yellow flyer taped to the bulletin board. He rolled his cart closer to read it. Annual Riverside Showcase open to all staff and students. Daniel read it twice, 3 times. His heart started beating faster. The showcase was the Academy's biggest event of the year. Students performed for parents, donors, and even local music critics. It was a huge deal. But the flyer said all staff and students. Did that include him? He pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of the flyer. The sign-up deadline was in 3 days. Performers had to register in the main office and submit their planned piece. Daniel pushed his cart toward the storage closet, his mind racing. Could he really do this? Sign up to perform in front of hundreds of people? People who had studied music their entire lives? The next morning, during his lunch break, Daniel sat in the staff cafeteria. Two other maintenance workers, Robert and Kevin, were arguing about last night's basketball game. Daniel pulled out his phone and stared at the photo of the flyer. "Hey, Daniel, you see they're doing that fancy concert thing again," Robert said, noticing what he was looking at. "All those rich kids showing off." "Yeah," Daniel said quietly. "Says staff can join too." Kevin laughed. "Can you imagine? Old Robert here doing ballet?" They both cracked up. Daniel forced a smile but said nothing. That afternoon he walked past the main office 5 times. Each time he slowed down, looking at the door. Each time he kept walking. On the 3rd day, right before the deadline, Daniel made his decision. His hands were sweaty as he pushed open the office door. The secretary, Mrs. Patterson, looked up from her computer. "Can I help you? I'd like to sign up," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For the showcase," Mrs. Patterson blinked. "The showcase? You mean the annual Riverside Showcase?" "Yes, ma'am." She stared at him for a long moment. Then she pulled out a registration form. "Name and what you'll be performing?" "Daniel Cooper, piano." Her pen froze. She looked up at him again, this time with confusion in her eyes. But she wrote it down anyway, words spread fast. By the next day, everyone knew that Daniel the janitor had signed up to play piano at the showcase. The reactions were exactly what he expected. In the hallways, students whispered and giggled as he walked by with his cleaning cart. In the staff room, the other workers made jokes. Even some of the teachers gave him pitying looks like he was setting himself up for embarrassment. But Daniel had made his choice. There was no turning back now. The whispers followed Daniel everywhere. In the supply closet, he overheard 2 cleaning staff talking about him. "Poor guy doesn't know what he's gotten himself into," one said. "It's gonna be painful to watch." Daniel pretended he didn't hear. He grabbed his mop and moved on. But their words stung more than he wanted to admit. The worst part came 3 days later. All showcase participants were required to attend a mandatory rehearsal meeting. Daniel had never been inside the main auditorium during the day. He usually only saw it at night, empty and quiet, when he vacuumed the rows of velvet seats. Now, as he walked through the heavy double doors, the space buzzed with energy. Students filled the seats, chatting and laughing. They all looked so confident in their expensive clothes, carrying instrument cases that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. Daniel wore his work uniform. He didn't have time to go home and change. His shift didn't end until 4, and the meeting started at 4:30. He found a seat in the back row, trying to make himself invisible. At the front of the auditorium stood director Helen Morse. She was a legend in the music world. A former concert pianist who had performed in theaters across Europe before retiring to teach. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore a black blazer that made her look even more intimidating. Director Morse clapped her hands twice. The chatter died instantly. "Welcome, performers." Her voice carried across the auditorium without a microphone. "This year's showcase will be our finest yet. We have critics from the Tribune attending, and several university scouts will be in the audience." Daniel's stomach dropped. University scouts, critics? He had thought this was just a school event. "Each of you will have exactly 5 minutes on stage," Director Morse continued. "Not a second more. This is a professional event, and I expect professional behavior from everyone." She picked up a clipboard. "We'll do a quick roll call so I can match faces to names. When I call you, stand up and tell us what you'll be performing." One by one, she called out names. A girl with perfect posture stood and announced she would play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. A boy with glasses said he'd perform a violin concerto by Mendelssohn. Each student sounded more impressive than the last. Daniel sank lower in his seat. What had he been thinking? "Daniel Cooper," Director Morse called out. The auditorium went silent. Every head turned, looking for whoever Daniel Cooper was. Slowly, Daniel stood up. He could feel dozens of eyes on him. Someone in the front row nudged their friend and pointed. "Yes," Daniel said, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat. "I'm here." Director Morse's eyes narrowed as she looked at him. She glanced down at her clipboard, then back up at him. "And you'll be performing a piano?" "Yes, ma'am. What piece?" Daniel had prepared for this question. He had practiced his answer. But now, with everyone staring at him, his mind went blank for a moment. "An original composition," he finally said. A ripple of whispers spread through the auditorium. Director Morse's eyebrows raised. An original piece? Do you have formal training in composition? No, ma'am. I see. Her tone was cool, professional, but Daniel could hear the doubt in it. And how long have you been studying piano? Daniel hesitated. Should he lie? Make up a teacher's name? But he had never been good at lying. I'm self-taught, ma'am. About 2 years. The whispers turned into barely contained laughter. A girl in the third row didn't even try to hide her giggle. The boy next to her shook his head, smirking. Director Morse held up her hand and the room quieted again. She looked at Daniel for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable. Well, she said finally, we'll see what you can do. Sit down, please. Daniel sat down quickly, his face burning. He wanted to disappear, to run out of the auditorium and never come back. He could withdraw his name, tell Mrs. Patterson it was all a mistake. But something inside him refused to quit. He had worked too hard. Those late nights in Studio C teaching himself from videos and borrowed books. The countless hours of practice when his fingers ached and his back hurt from sitting on the piano bench after a full day of work. It all meant something. After the meeting ended, Daniel tried to leave quickly. But as he walked up the aisle, he heard footsteps behind him. Hey, wait up. Daniel turned. A young man, maybe 19 or 20, jogged up to him. He had curly red hair and carried a trumpet case. I'm Brian, the young man said, extending his hand. I just wanted to say that's pretty cool. Teaching yourself piano. Daniel shook his hand, surprised. Thanks. Don't let them get to you, Brian said, lowering his voice. Half these kids have had private lessons since they were 5. They think that's the only way to learn music. But some of the greatest musicians in history were self-taught. Really? Absolutely. Keep your head up, man. Brian gave him a friendly pat on the shoulder and walked away. That small moment of kindness carried Daniel through the next week. Because the doubts only got worse. His supervisor, Mr. Raymond, called him into the office. Daniel, I heard about this showcase business, he said, leaning back in his chair. Look, I'm not telling you what to do with your free time. But people are talking. They're saying you might embarrass yourself up there. I know what I'm doing, Daniel said, though his voice didn't sound as confident as he wanted. Do you? These are serious musicians, trained professionals and students who've dedicated their lives to this. Mr. Raymond's face softened. I'm just trying to look out for you. Maybe sit this one out. There'll be other opportunities. But Daniel knew there wouldn't be other opportunities. This was it, his one chance to show what he could do. That night, Daniel stayed in Studio C until almost 2 a.m. His fingers flew across the keys, playing his composition over and over. He had written it himself, every note. It told his story. The long bus rides to work, the quiet nights cleaning empty hallways, the moment he first sat at this piano and felt like his life had meaning. The piece wasn't perfect, he knew that. But it was honest. It was real. As Daniel finally locked up the studio and headed home, his phone buzzed. A text from his younger brother. Mom told me about your piano thing. That's awesome. We're definitely coming to watch. Daniel smiled. His family didn't have much, but they always supported each other. His mother worked 2 jobs. His brother was studying at community college while working nights at a grocery store. None of them had ever been to a place like Riverside Academy, but they would be there in the audience. And suddenly that mattered more than what the director thought, more than what the other students whispered. He wasn't doing this for them anymore. He was doing it for himself, for his family, for everyone who ever thought they weren't good enough because they didn't have the right training or come from the right background. The showcase was in 2 weeks. Daniel had practiced as much as he could. Now he just had to wait and hope that when the moment came, his fingers wouldn't fail him. The day of the showcase arrived faster than Daniel expected. He woke up at 6 a.m, even though he didn't need to be at the academy until evening. Sleep had been impossible anyway. His mind kept racing through every note of his composition, every hand position, every transition. He made coffee and sat by the small window in his apartment. Outside, the city was just beginning to wake up. A few cars passed on the street below. A jogger ran by with their dog. Normal people doing normal things. In a few hours, Daniel would be standing on stage in front of hundreds of people, doing something that felt anything but normal. His phone rang. It was his mother. Danny, I just wanted to call before your big day. Her voice was warm and encouraging. Your brother and I will be there early to get good seats. "We're so proud of you, honey." "Thanks, Mom," Daniel said, his throat tight with emotion. "You remember what your father used to say?" she continued. "It's not about being perfect. It's about being brave enough to try." After they hung up, Daniel sat there for a long moment. His father had passed away 5 years ago. He'd been a construction worker, a simple man who worked with his hands his whole life. He never had fancy dreams or big ambitions, but he'd always told Daniel to find something that made him feel alive. Daniel looked down at his own hands, rough and calloused from years of manual work. These weren't the hands of a concert pianist, but they were his hands, and tonight they would tell his story. By late afternoon, Daniel arrived at the academy. The building looked different, transformed. Red carpets had been rolled out at the entrance. Spotlights were being set up. Cars were already starting to arrive, dropping off families dressed in their best clothes. Daniel went in through the staff entrance like always. He had brought his only suit, the one he'd bought at a thrift store for his father's funeral. It was a bit worn and the sleeves were slightly too short, but it was clean and pressed. In the staff locker room, he changed slowly, trying to calm his nerves. His hands were shaking so badly he had trouble with his tie. After 3 attempts, he finally got it right. When he walked toward the backstage area, he could hear the auditorium filling up. Voices echoed and blended together. The excited chatter of parents, the nervous laughter of performers. Backstage was chaos. Students in formal concert wear rushed around with their instruments. A girl practiced scales on her violin in the corner. 2 boys argued over who had the better warm-up spot. Stage crew members checked lighting and sound equipment. Daniel found a quiet corner and tried to stay out of everyone's way. He watched as Director Morse moved through the backstage area like a general inspecting troops. She stopped to give instructions to performers, adjusted someone's posture, listened to a few bars of a flute piece. When she reached Daniel, she paused. Her eyes traveled from his face down to his suit and back up again. "Mr. Cooper," she said. "Are you ready?" "Yes, ma'am." She studied him for a moment longer. "You're performing last. That's traditionally when we place our—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Our developing performers. Less pressure. The audience is usually in a forgiving mood by then." Daniel understood what she really meant. She'd put him last because she expected him to be the weakest act, a way to end the show on a sympathetic note. The janitor who tried his best. "I understand," Daniel said quietly. Director Morse nodded and moved on. Daniel felt his confidence wavering. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe this was a terrible idea. The lights in the auditorium dimmed. The showcase was beginning. From backstage, Daniel could hear everything. The first performer was a 15-year-old girl who played a Beethoven sonata on piano. She was technically perfect, hitting every note with precision. The audience applauded enthusiastically. Next came a boy on cello, then another on violin. Each performance was impressive. These students had been training for years, and it showed. They moved with confidence. They performed with the ease of people who belonged on that stage. As the showcase continued, Daniel's nervousness grew. He paced back and forth in his corner, his palms sweating. He wiped them on his pants, but they just got sweaty again. Brian, the friendly trumpet player from the rehearsal meeting, was performing now. Daniel could hear the bright, clear notes of his trumpet filling the auditorium. The audience loved it. When Brian finished, the applause was thunderous. Brian came backstage grinning, his face flushed with excitement. He saw Daniel and walked over. "You're up soon, right?" Brian asked. "Last one," Daniel said. "Hey, you've got this. Just remember why you started playing in the first place. That's what matters." Before Daniel could respond, Brian was swept away by friends congratulating him. One by one, the performers went on. Each one seemed more talented than the last. A girl sang an opera piece that made the audience go silent with awe. Twin brothers played a piano duet that earned a standing ovation. Finally, after what felt like hours, Daniel heard his name. Our final performer of the evening is Daniel Cooper, a member of our facilities staff here at Riverside Academy. Daniel will be performing an original composition. The way the announcer said facilities staff made it sound almost apologetic, like they were warning the audience not to expect too much. Daniel walked onto the stage. The lights were bright, making it hard to see the audience clearly. But he could sense them out there. Hundreds of people. He could hear a few scattered whispers. Someone coughed. He walked to the grand piano at center stage. It was the same model as the one in Studio C, but somehow it looked different under the lights. Bigger, more intimidating. Daniel sat down on the bench and adjusted it slightly. He placed his hands on the keys and felt their familiar coolness against his fingers. For a moment, he forgot about the audience. He forgot about Director Morse sitting in the front row with her arms crossed. He forgot about the students backstage who'd been whispering about him all night. He thought about his mother and brother, somewhere out there in the darkness. He thought about his father's words. He thought about all those late nights in Studio C, teaching himself note by note, measure by measure. The auditorium was completely silent now, waiting, judging. Daniel closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and let his fingers find the first note. The sound that came from the piano wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't timid or hesitant. It was clear and strong and full of emotion. Daniel's hands began to move across the keys and his composition came to life. The piece started softly, almost like a whisper. It spoke of early mornings and tired hands, of watching through doorways and dreaming of impossible things. Then the music began to build. His right hand danced across the higher keys while his left hand provided a steady, rhythmic foundation. The melody grew stronger, more confident. It told the story of taking that first risk, of sitting down at a piano for the first time and feeling something wake up inside. Daniel's eyes were still closed, but his hands knew exactly where to go. Every note he played was intentional. Every chord told part of his journey. In the audience, Director Morse's arms slowly uncrossed. She leaned forward in her seat, her eyes wide. This wasn't what she had expected. Not at all. The music continued to build, moving through complex passages that Daniel had practiced hundreds of times. His fingers moved with surprising speed and precision across the keys, executing runs and transitions that shouldn't have been possible for someone with only 2 years of self-taught experience. But this wasn't just technical skill. This was something else, something deeper. The composition moved into its emotional heart. The melody became more complex, more vulnerable. It spoke of doubt and fear, of wanting to give up but pushing forward anyway, of believing in yourself when no one else does. Daniel's whole body moved with the music now. His shoulders swayed slightly. His foot worked the pedals with perfect timing. He was completely lost in the performance, pouring everything he had into each note. The audience had gone completely still. No one coughed. No one whispered. They were all captivated by this janitor who was playing like his life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. Daniel's fingers moved faster now, dancing across the keys with a confidence that surprised even him. The composition had reached its most challenging section. This was the part he'd struggled with during practice, the part that had kept him up late at night, playing it over and over until his hands cramped. But right now, in this moment, it felt effortless. Every note flowed naturally into the next. The music swelled and dipped, creating waves of emotion that washed over the silent audience. In the third row, Daniel's mother had her hand pressed against her chest. Tears streamed down her face. She had never heard her son play before. She didn't even know he could play. When he'd told her about the showcase, she'd assumed he'd learned a simple tune, maybe a basic melody. But this was something else entirely. Next to her, Daniel's brother sat frozen, his mouth slightly open. He kept looking from the stage to his mother and back again, as if trying to confirm that this was really happening. Director Morse had completely forgotten her usual critical posture. She was leaning so far forward in her seat that she was nearly standing. Her trained ear caught every nuance of Daniel's playing. The dynamics were perfect. The timing was impeccable. But more than that, the emotion behind the music was raw and honest in a way she rarely heard, even from her most advanced students. She had been teaching music for 30 years. She had trained dozens of students who went on to prestigious conservatories and professional careers, but she recognized something special when she heard it. And what she was hearing right now was undeniably special. The music shifted again. Daniel's hands moved to the lower register of the piano, creating a deep, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through the entire auditorium. This section represented the lonely nights, the doubts, the moments when he'd wanted to give up but didn't. A music critic from the city newspaper sat in the 5th row, his notebook forgotten in his lap. He'd come tonight expecting a typical student showcase, pleasant but forgettable. He'd been planning to write a brief, polite review and move on. But now he was scrambling to grab his pen, trying to capture what he was witnessing. The students backstage had crowded near the wings to watch. The girl who'd performed the opera piece stood with her hand over her mouth. The twin brothers who'd played the piano duet exchanged shocked glances. Even the students who'd laughed during the rehearsal meeting now stood in respectful silence. Brian, the trumpet player, grinned broadly. He'd known there was something different about Daniel. He just knew it. Daniel's composition was building toward its climax now. His hands moved across the entire span of the keyboard, from the lowest bass notes to the highest treble tones. The music grew louder, more powerful, more insistent. It demanded to be heard. This section told a different story, not of struggle and doubt, but of triumph, of finding your voice against all odds, of proving that worth isn't measured by where you come from or who taught you, but by what's inside your heart. The technical difficulty of this section was remarkable. Daniel's fingers executed complex trills and arpeggios that would challenge even advanced students. His hands crossed over each other seamlessly. His foot worked the sustain pedal with perfect timing, allowing notes to ring and blend together in harmony. But technique alone wouldn't have created this effect. What made the performance extraordinary was the soul behind it. Every note meant something. Every phrase told part of the story. This wasn't just music. This was Daniel's life, translated into sound. In the front row, an elderly man sat with tears running down his weathered face. He was a university scout, here to identify potential scholarship candidates. In his 40 years of attending performances, he had heard thousands of young musicians. But rarely had he been moved like this. He was already making notes about how to approach Daniel after the show. The composition reached its final movement. The tempo slowed. The music became gentle again, reflective. Daniel's hands moved with tender precision across the keys. This was the resolution, the acceptance, the peace that comes from pursuing your passion regardless of the obstacles. The melody was simple now, stripped down to its emotional core. Just a beautiful, honest expression of what it means to find the thing you were meant to do. Daniel played the final phrase, a series of soft descending notes that felt like a peaceful sigh. His hands lifted slowly from the keys. The last note hung in the air, sustained by the pedal, gradually fading into silence. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. The auditorium was completely still. Daniel sat at the piano, his eyes still closed, his hands resting in his lap. He was emotionally drained. He'd given everything he had to that performance. Whatever happened next, he could at least say he'd done his absolute best. Then Director Morse stood up. She rose from her seat in the front row, and before she even started clapping, the sound echoed through the quiet auditorium. Her applause was slow at first, deliberate, the kind of clapping that says something important just happened. Then others began to stand. Daniel's mother and brother jumped to their feet. The university scout stood, clapping enthusiastically. The music critic stood. The students backstage burst into applause. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet. The applause grew from a trickle to a roar. People weren't just clapping politely. They were cheering. Some were whistling. Others were shouting, "Bravo!" Daniel opened his eyes. He blinked in the bright stage lights, confused at first. Then he saw them. Hundreds of people, all standing, all applauding. For him, he stood up slowly from the piano bench, hardly believing what was happening. His legs felt weak. His hands were shaking again, but this time from overwhelming emotion rather than nerves. He gave a small, awkward bow. The applause grew even louder. In the front row, Director Morse had tears streaming down her face. She was clapping so hard her hands hurt, but she couldn't stop. In 3 decades of running this showcase, she had never given a standing ovation. She had always remained professionally neutral, offering polite applause to all performers equally. But this was different. This was the kind of performance that comes along once in a lifetime. The applause continued for a full minute. Then 2 minutes. People didn't want to stop. They didn't want this moment to end. Daniel looked out into the audience, trying to find his family. Finally, he spotted them. His mother was crying and clapping. His brother had his phone out, recording everything. His face lit up with pride and joy. Daniel felt his own eyes fill with tears. All those late nights, all those doubts, all those moments when he'd questioned whether he was crazy for even trying. It had all led to this moment. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the applause began to fade. People started sitting back down, though the excited murmur of conversation filled the auditorium. Daniel gave one more small bow and walked off stage on unsteady legs. The moment he stepped into the wings, he was surrounded. Students crowded around him, offering congratulations. The girl who'd sung opera hugged him. The twin brothers shook his hand vigorously. Everyone wanted to tell him how incredible his performance had been. Brian pushed through the crowd and grabbed Daniel in a bear hug. "I told you, man. I knew you had it in you." But Daniel barely heard any of it. His mind was still trying to process what had just happened. Had that really been him playing? Had he really just received a standing ovation at Riverside Academy? A stage manager gently moved people aside. "Mr. Cooper, Director Morse wants to see you." Right away, the crowd parted. Daniel's heart sank slightly. What did the director want? Was he in trouble for using the Academy piano to practice without permission? Would she confront him about all those late nights in Studio C? He followed the stage manager through the backstage corridors, his euphoria mixing with apprehension. They reached a door marked Director's Office. The stage manager knocked twice and opened the door. "Mr. Cooper is here." "Send him in," came Director Morse's voice. Daniel stepped inside. The office was elegant, with framed photographs of famous musicians lining the walls. Awards and plaques covered one entire shelf. A large desk dominated the center of the room. Director Morse stood by the window, her back to him. She seemed to be composing herself. When she turned around, her eyes were still red from crying. She looked at Daniel for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice was thick with emotion. "Where did you study?" Daniel swallowed hard. This was it. The moment of truth. "Nowhere, ma'am. I learned here. In your hallways. At night after my shift." Director Morse closed her eyes and shook her head slowly, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. "You taught yourself everything I just heard? That composition, that technique, that emotion, all self-taught?" "Yes, ma'am." She walked closer to him, studying his face intently. "Do you understand what you just did out there? Do you have any idea how extraordinary that performance was?" Daniel didn't know what to say. He just stood there, his heart pounding. Director Morse's expression changed. The stern, professional mask she always wore melted away. In its place was something Daniel had never seen before. Genuine awe and excitement. "Mr. Cooper," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "we need to talk about your future." Director Morse gestured to a leather chair across from her desk. "Please sit down." Daniel sat, feeling strange in this office. He'd cleaned it hundreds of times, always careful not to disturb the papers on her desk or the perfectly arranged books on the shelves. But he'd never actually sat in it like this, as a guest rather than the cleaning staff. "I want to offer you something," Director Morse began, settling into her own chair. "A full scholarship to Riverside Academy. Complete tuition coverage, private lessons, everything you need to develop your gift properly." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "A scholarship? But I'm 28 years old. I'm not a student." "Age is just a number," Director Morse said firmly. "I've been teaching for 30 years, Daniel. I've worked with child prodigies and late bloomers. I've seen students with every advantage money can buy. But what you have is something that can't be taught in a classroom or bought with money. You have raw, natural talent combined with genuine passion. That's rare, incredibly rare." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "I'll be honest with you. You have significant gaps in your technical knowledge. Music theory, sight reading, classical technique. All of that needs work. But your musicality, your emotional understanding of the instrument, your ability to tell a story through music. Daniel, some musicians study their entire lives and never develop what you displayed on that stage tonight." Daniel felt dizzy. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "Say yes," Director Morse replied with a slight smile. "Say yes, and tomorrow we start planning your training schedule. We'll work around whatever you need. If you need to keep your job for now, we'll arrange evening classes, whatever it takes." Before Daniel could respond, there was a knock on the door. The elderly man from the front row, the university scout, poked his head in. "Helen, do you have a moment?" he asked. "Professor Andrews, of course." Director Morse gestured him inside. "Daniel, this is Professor Andrews from the Conservatory of Music downtown." The professor extended his hand to Daniel. "That was quite a performance, young man. Quite remarkable indeed." "Thank you, sir." Daniel said, shaking his hand. I'd like to discuss something with you as well, Professor Andrews said. The conservatory has a special program for non-traditional students. We've had everyone from mechanics to doctors decide to pursue music later in life. Your age isn't a barrier, it's an asset. You bring life experience that younger students simply don't have. That depth of emotion in your playing that comes from having lived. Daniel looked between the two of them, overwhelmed. I don't understand. An hour ago, people were laughing at me. Now you're both offering me opportunities I never dreamed possible. Director Morse's expression softened. An hour ago, we hadn't heard you play. Now we have. That changes everything. There was another knock. This time it was the music critic from the newspaper. Then Brian burst in with two of the other students. Then Mrs. Patterson from the office appeared with a stack of business cards from audience members who wanted to contact Daniel. The small office became crowded with people, all wanting to talk to the janitor who'd shocked everyone. Daniel felt like he was in a dream. A wonderful, impossible dream that he might wake up from at any moment. Finally, Director Morse politely cleared the room, promising everyone they could speak with Daniel later. When the door closed and it was just the two of them again, she turned to him with a serious expression. I need to know something, Daniel, and I need you to be completely honest. Did you use our facilities without permission? The piano in Studio C? Daniel's stomach dropped. Here it was. The consequence he'd been worried about all along. He could lose his job. He could face charges for unauthorized use of expensive equipment. Yes, ma'am, he said quietly, meeting her eyes. I did after my shifts late at night. I made sure everything was locked up and secure, and I was always careful with the instruments. I'm sorry. I know I should have asked permission. Director Morse was quiet for a long moment. Then to Daniel's surprise, she laughed. It was a warm, genuine laugh that transformed her entire face. Do you know why I became a music teacher, Daniel? She asked. I was a successful concert pianist. I performed all over the world. I made good money. I had fame and recognition, but something was missing. She walked to the window and looked out at the now empty parking lot. Then one day I saw a young girl playing piano in a shopping mall. She was maybe 7 years old, playing on one of those public pianos they sometimes set up. She wasn't very good technically, but she played with such pure joy that people stopped to listen. In that moment, I realized what I really wanted to do. I wanted to help people find that joy, that connection to music. She turned back to Daniel. You sneaking into Studio C at night, teaching yourself from videos and borrowed books, practicing until your hands hurt. That's exactly the kind of dedication and passion this school is supposed to nurture. So no, Daniel, you're not in trouble. In fact, as of tomorrow, Studio C is officially assigned to you. Use it whenever you want. Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. Thank you. I don't know how to thank you. Thank me by saying yes to that scholarship. Thank me by showing other people that it's never too late to pursue your dreams. Outside the office, Daniel found his mother and brother waiting in the hallway. His mother grabbed him in a tight hug the moment she saw him. Baby, I'm so proud of you, she sobbed into his shoulder. Your father would have been so proud. His brother hugged him next. Dude, that was insane. I had no idea you could play like that. I've been living with you and I had no idea. I wanted to be sure before I told anyone, Daniel explained. I didn't want to get anyone's hopes up if it turned out I was terrible. Terrible? His brother laughed. Did you hear that applause? You brought down the house. The three of them walked out together into the cool night air. The parking lot was still full of people standing around in small groups, talking excitedly about the showcase. Several people stopped Daniel to congratulate him. Students who'd ignored him in the hallways now wanted to shake his hand. Parents asked for his name so they could follow his future performances. It was almost midnight by the time Daniel finally made it home to his small apartment. He sat on his worn couch and just stared at the wall for a while, trying to process everything that had happened.